I'm Jim McDonough, the Managing Director for Programs and Services for IVMF. A lot of my colleagues are here. I'm going to pass the mic to Mike in a second, but we're going to kind of run through a series of discussions with you today. And we're going to start with our Executive Director, Mike Haney, and we're going to get right into the meat of this thing called AmericaServes. But at the top, I merely want to say thank you for without everything you've been doing to support this body of work, to express an interest in it, to partner with us, to fund it, to coordinate, to collaborate. It's been very different these last 5 years. Robin and I were just speaking that we think that the sector is starting to move to this sense of collective purpose versus individual purpose. And it's been a long time coming. And we're starting to realize is that when people work to their strengths and trust others to work to their strengths, even better things can happen for people who serve and their families. So we're starting to realize this. And I think we're on the precipice of creating greater energy around these ideas, greater awareness of what can be done to serve human beings who serve their country better, and their families. So this is Gilly Cantor. She is my trusted sidekick, but more than that, she's a dear friend. And I want to say some words at the top about two very special people. One is Gilly and the other is Lindsay. Where are you, Lindsay? So thank you. So these two have been my soulmates when I lost my first soulmate in this work, Maggie Pollard from Accenture. So the idea of doing this work with very special people has been both a privilege. So to Gilly and Lindsay, who helped me put all this together collectively. And we've got some things headed your way. There's a truck on its way from FedEx with this year's transparency report. So you'll have a parting gift as you leave here today. But I want to say thank you to Gilly and thank you to Lindsay because without them, this really doesn't happen. Last thing I'll say is my friends in AUSA, lifetime member, love the organization. Hosting us today, this is a new one for us. We want to be more connected to our armed forces. AUSA has been the conduit for me for years to stay connected to my Army, and I appreciate their hospitality. So, Mike, if you would you come up? Thank you.
I refuse to be mic'd up because I explained that it would take longer to put one of those mics on me than my remarks, so I'm gonna stand back here. I feel the need first to clarify something. Maggie has not been lost to this earth, simply lost to Jim. So I think that's important to clarify. And I also have no idea where you got that picture of me. Yeah, I think the effort was, I very rarely see Jim dressed like that. Mostly it is flannel plaid shirt. So it was probably an attempt for me to match Jim as opposed to the other way around. I think the first thing I want to do is thank all of the providers and the folks from the care coordination centers that are up here today. I think if I've learned anything from AmericaServes over the course of the last 4.5, 5 years, it is that this program really is an exemplar in this space of the idea of great organizations willing to work together can accomplish great things. And that, at its core, that idea is what makes the AmericaServes program work. It is that, as a former Air Force guy, we would talk all the time about, there you go, talk all the time about service before self, an Air Force core value. This works because great organizations collaborate to provide service that isn't about advancing every day the individual organization, but instead focused on those we serve and helping them realize whatever aspirations that they have when they take the uniform off. Jim, as he typically does, sets up. He tells me what I'm supposed to say. I should say he doesn't. I got 2-page outline. I'm going to summarize it very quickly in that. Where we've been, where we are, where we're going, where we've been. AmericaServes started out as a pretty simple idea that if we could identify stocks of resources in communities, network those resources together in a way that the academic term collective impact, that the value of those networks becomes much more significant than the individual parts, and if we do it in a way that is both efficient but also of a level of care and quality with regard to the veteran experience. This is one of the things that I've learned over the years from my good friend Bob McDonald, our former VA secretary, but also the former chairman and CEO at P&G, where customer experience is central to creating value. And I think that's what we've identified in the context of AmericaServes. It's not just about creating efficiencies, but it's about creating efficiencies and at the same time delivering an exceptional customer experience to those who enter and then are navigated through these networks. And really, over the past 5 years, the evolution of AmericaServes has been about enacting that idea in a way that creates value both for those served, but also the communities in which our veterans choose to settle and work and go to school and raise families. Because the other big insight of AmericaServes is veterans don't transition to national programs. Veterans transition to towns, villages, cities, communities, and if we cannot, as the community of those working in the veteran serving space, if we cannot empower towns, villages, cities, communities to receive and subsequently themselves empower veterans who choose to settle in those localities, we've missed the mark in a really big way. And I think that's what's really special about AmericaServes and to be candid, all of the other community-connected initiatives that are taking hold across the space. I look at this as the new frontier of veterans work, and I'm excited about where it's going. I'm scared at the same time. Jim knows that. When we as an organization are out there making commitments to communities, these have to be commitments that we take very seriously. And it's important to understand if we start going down this road that we're committed for the long term, and that is true in the case of our commitment. I'll conclude by saying I think I've been working in this space for 12 years, and basically since I got out of the Air Force. And one of the things that I have been constructively critical of is the fact that often in the veteran serving space we try to reinvent the wheel. We try to fix problems that other serving communities outside of our own have already solved and addressed, and we decide we need our own idiosyncratic solution for veterans, and often that's not the case. And as a consequence, our ability to look outside our own silo and import, I think that's something that we can do better. What's interesting here is this is the opposite. I think to Jim's earlier point, what we've come to realize is that what we've been able to innovate and develop, and when I say we, I'm talking about the big we, everybody in this room, with regard to these collective impact models situated in communities, built around a case management model and a technology, and all of that is positioned to be exported very powerfully across social service infrastructure and systems serving all Americans. And just yesterday, I won't give a ton of context, but just yesterday I sat down with some folks here in DC who are health policy experts, not in the veteran space, but more broadly, and had a conversation about how this model works, what we're doing, what we've accomplished, and what we're seeing. And they were blown away. They were blown away because they basically said what you're describing is what healthcare more broadly has been trying to figure out for the better part of the last 20 years and hasn't been able to crack that nut. So I think we have a real opportunity as a community to bring an innovation to market. And I'm a business school professor. I talk in those terms, excuse me, but bring an innovation to market that can have real impact, long-term impact for social service delivery in this country for decades and decades to come. So I thank everybody for their commitment to the work, for helping us be impactful in communities around the country. I look forward to what's next. So thank you very much.
Just a couple of points as we proceed. We are today more than this room. There's about 100 people joining us around the country by live streaming. So a couple of technical points about that is that if you have a question, we're going to have to pass a mic because that's the only way they can pick up on your question as we go through this. We will also pause periodically to let our friends around the country kind of chime in through a chat room that Lindsay is managing for this as we distribute it. It is being recorded. So if anybody wants to bolt now, this is your opportunity. So, so the words that Mike just said will come back throughout the course of this conversation today about advancing the cause beyond our sector. And we'll talk about that in some very distinct ways. The other thing I just want to say is that I appreciate the leadership that the Institute has lent itself to in this university. Without the power of the university behind this institute, this work is not possible. So to not acknowledge the contribution of our own university as a standout for what it's attempting to do in this country, I'd be remiss if I didn't do that. So the leadership of the university behind Mike, behind this wonderful organization has been really the kind of allows us to put gas in this tank every day. So we're most grateful for that. So we are talking today, Gilly and I, about a set of themes. This is going to be a discussion. And some of the things that we want to talk about, we've joined you throughout the years at various points of your life. Some of you have been with us since the days of kindergarten, when we were not really gifted and talented and we were awkward in every sense of the word. Others of you are picking us up for the first time. So for the first time in a long time, we want to reset your understanding around some basic things associated with this. And it begins with, why are we doing this? And we'll get into it. And I think it's important that you understand that, because when we first started, it's like, let's build a network, you know? Okay, what are we going to do next? And so along the way, you start developing your ideas around why you're doing this. What is the possibility behind this work? And we'll get into that. We're also going to talk about where we are today. What have we accomplished? And then we're going to peel it back. We're going to kind of deconstruct it a little bit and show you behind the lid what goes on in these communities. Our partners are in this room. They'll carry part of that conversation around a very specific topic, how this works. They're going to isolate on a use case, Hurricane Florence, on how the Carolinas came together to prepare for that, to deal with it, in the aftermath of it, how were people served. So we're going to get into some real use cases. You're going to hear some voices that will introduce video, some voices that will introduce amongst a panel in the middle of this, but it's going to peel apart how this really works. And then lastly, where are we going next year? We now have a foundational strategy. You hear us talk about this, but there are these things that we'll label as aim points, and I'll get into why we're calling them aim points for all the right reasons. Gilly, would you like to add anything to that?
No.
Okay.
Good.
All right. So look, for my Carolina friends, this is personal a bit today. We have lost a dear friend in the last 2 weeks. This individual was a staunch supporter of the early days of this work in North Carolina, and we got together as a team to just come together with the terms of losing this individual who meant so much to the early days of this work. I am personally more or less dedicating today to this wonderful man because he was involved at the very beginning. He was an architect in Charlotte, North Carolina for our second network would be built there, but he has become a fixture in the Carolinas. And I'd be remiss if I didn't remember what he was all about. So for us personally, this is about a dear friend who we lost unexpectedly. So, all right, this is where Gilly and I are going to begin tag teaming. There's a headline up there, great team, great networks, great impact. I'll talk about the team because it's not just people in the university. First and foremost, it's our partners across the country. That map represents 17 communities that are growing, doing this work. By the way, they're all interconnected, and we'll get into that. But for me, the team is important. It's our own resources. It's our friends in Unitas, our technology partner, who this work would not be possible without my dear pal, Dan Brillman, who together we conceived of this idea and put it together. My pals in Accenture, who put first together the project management behind all this stuff. They're geniuses at it. They helped us get the training wheels off this bike. The team is large because it now extends into all these communities. extends to what we hope to be longitudinal research of this, but it is a true team effort that is in motion around these ideas. And people need to understand that. We have built this idea that we are not going to turn a proverbial screwdriver from 3,000 miles away. Our investments are local, they are hands-on, we are coaches, and we sit back and watch all this unfold and try to kind of guide it along the way. Gilly, do you want to talk about networks?
Sure.
Yeah.
So when I started in 2016, it was actually before there were 7. I think there were maybe 4 or 5 networks. So we basically more than tripled just since I've been here. And we wanted to mark that so that depending on when you kind of started diving into our work, you can see how much we've grown. And in particular, over the past 2 years, I think especially, this has taken off. Definitely really excited about some of the new places that we've put on the map, in particular our affiliate partners, I think, which you'll hear more about, where there are other people around the country that are using the Unite Us platform, and that affords us a lot of possibilities to partner with them and to make sure that we can refer people between us, which I think is another kind of unique thing that we're able to accomplish through this model.
Coming very soon will be a AmericaServes initiative. We're essentially splitting the atom in South Carolina because our partner there serves both states. Why not do 2 networks? Very simple thing. Our pal Ilario Pontano and the university's development team just secured resources to build the 3rd market in Texas. So Texas is a real important place for us. It is a very populous state where people like us come from. So we're really heavily investing in the state of Texas to be putting up a statewide effort. And you'll hear more about Texas in the coming months. But this is important to understand, is that underneath all that, there have been about 22,000 individuals who have been touched through this network, and they have been touched because of the providers in the network. But people are coming to these solutions because they're starting to work. Their needs, on average, they double. It's 1 person on average has 2 needs. And so the idea, you begin to pick apart some of the why a network is important when you begin to understand that co-occurrence is real. Inside it, it takes many hands to solve the problems, but you must not do that on an uninformed basis as to your role. So we'll get into this a little bit, but that's a lot of human beings whose lives have been changed through this. So, Gil.
Last thing to mention is, as the person who's measuring and sharing the data, it's a pleasure to put up that table because every single number has improved, and you're going to hear why that is. It's not me. It's just me holding a mirror back up and having these guys talk to each other every day and learn from each other and put those learnings into practice immediately from place to place.
I want to go back to Mike's comment a little bit about the possibility to change health and human services more broadly. Affiliated networks for us are a new chapter. These are clients of Dan Brillman and Unite Us. As Unite Us unfolds care coordination software broadly in the healthcare marketplace, we come in beside it with our practice to kind of help these communities develop the performance aspects of how their networks work. So it's a brand new chapter for us where our technology partner took lead. We come in behind it and shore up the performance aspects and the progress of those networks. It's a really cool model because it just doubles capacity really quickly. You're able to grow because Dan and his team are advancing the cause more broadly in health and human service delivery around these ideas of care coordination. So where we can help those communities that want to adopt the AmericaServes way of doing it with concierge coordination centers in the middle of things, one of which is in the room, our dear friends in Everymind. We're going to feature them a little bit, the National Capital Region. The world is an oyster at this point, and it's possible to kind of go after broader health and human service transformation through these efforts. So, okay, we're going to start by deconstructing this to make sure you understand why we're doing this. We don't take it for granted. And like I said, some of you knew us from the very beginning. Some of you know us today for the first time. But we actually want to just remind you around the why we're doing this work. And I'm going to turn the hot mic over to Gilly and follow her, because there is this thing called the theory of change. And we're not going to nerd you out, but we believe it's very important that you understand underneath the surface of this, there are bodies of evidence that have been borrowed from, and there is an end state in mind. And I want to take you all the way to the right because it's where Mike left us, transforming health and human service delivery systems in this country. That's beyond the veteran sector because that's what's possible here. The ability to serve as exemplars in this nation for how to do this, That's where we're aiming. And we're going to walk you through this as to where we are, why we're there, and how we're doing this just for a moment. So, Gil.
So Mike talked about both the beginning and the end.
Yeah.
He mentioned collective impact. That's sort of one of the bodies of work that we've built from. I think the way that we do this is a little bit different. It's been hard for us to find the exact example in the collective impact literature of what exactly we're doing, because we're making it up a little bit as we go. But also from social determinants of health. And that's why we can, as we get to the end, start to look bigger than just our own population. So I think again, I mentioned I started in 2016, and before I got there, Jim, Maggie, and Brillman were running a marathon, and they brought Nick along, and he tried to catch up. You'll hear from Nick later, where they knew why they were doing what they were doing, but no one had written it down. And so we kind of realized how important it is to write it down, because then when you realize you're doing something bigger than what you thought you were doing before, you can mark that in time a little bit and see what's different. And I think even just since I joined the team, we've realized that it's more than building a network, because once you have 3 or 4, you realize that it would be a waste for them not to talk to each other, and for everyone who comes next to be better off than the one that started before. And so I think that's why what you see here is that you start, every time we go into a community, and there have to be the right conditions for a network to get off the ground, which we'll talk about. Yep. And then, you build something, and then you have to make sure that thing is working before you can move on and say, oh, we helped the person. And so, and Mike talked about that, making sure that the people who serve the people who have served are better off. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're meeting their mission. They're being efficient. And only then can you start to say, well, did we move the needle for that person in their life? Is their health and well-being better? And then you can say, well, we've done something that works, and other people should also try this model. That's kind of, so I think we're at, and there's a reason why the circles get bigger, because the problems get harder, and proving them gets harder. So I think we sort of think we're starting to nudge into that last bubble. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, there's some things here that I think are important to understand in this line, the community conditions. Not every community wants to do this work this way. Not every community can do this work this way. There's a level of readiness in the communities around AmericaServes that I want you to understand exists. And there's really 3 simple ingredients that we've distilled it down to. One is strong leadership in a community that's willing to kind of push an agenda, a change agenda, not accept the status quo. If you don't have it, you can't force it. And believe me, Maggie knows this well, where we tried to force it early, we were rebuffed, sent packing. We were sent out of San Antonio, Texas, where we now have a market, on a rail the first time we were down there. And then they came back around. It's like, maybe this isn't a bad idea. You got some progress. And so the first important ingredient is leadership. Got to have it. If it's not there, the conditions aren't right. Secondly, philanthropic support. You'll hear us talk about it in the room today. Where are you, Megan? Where's Megan Andros? So I don't know where she went, but the Heinz endowments have been one of those philanthropic partners who has actually put fuel in the tank to allow the car to drive. And so the role of philanthropy here to innovate, where government is not comfortable, philanthropy takes greater risks and places bets. And they hope those bets pay off, but they're the ones who are willing to kind of get in early, see if an idea works, and we've taken them along for the ride. And they've been wonderful partners. That's the second ingredient. The third ingredient is providers in the country. For without them, none of this is possible. So if you really understand who our customers are across this country, they are providers in the network. It took us a long time to figure that out, is where are we aiming to change? We're aiming to change how providers do work in this country. And so those conditions are really, what you need to understand is they've emerged as a practice. And we'll start talking about the practice in a moment. But Gilly and I go back and forth. I actually think we're more in this third circle. We're about ready to enter into this fourth circle, especially with Dan Brillman and the Unitas team, to just dip our toes into the water of the broader health and human service efforts in this country. But do you understand a little bit more about the why we're doing this? Because we're gonna get into another level here. It's gonna take us down a level. We ultimately want to change the world, the way the world serves human needs. Simply stated, we want to be the group that plays a leading role in showing how that can be done. We don't have all the answers. We have an answer, but this is literally, Nicole's looking at me, it's change the world kind of stuff. We are attempting to change the world the way people are served. So it's heady stuff, and it has to be underpinned with a little bit of evidence. You have to measure it, but you got to know where you're going. It's that old adage, any road will take you there. Pick one, have the courage to change it. But that's our ultimate goal, is to position us as in this sector as being capable of influencing broader health and human service transformation. So, all right, Gilly, take us down a level.
So I have to measure it. It's great. So these levels kind of help us, I think, understand why, as far as we've gotten in building what we've built, that we're catching up on the evidence side. And so if you think about a community without a network, in an ideal situation, you'd have a baseline for what it's like to get services in a community that doesn't coordinate care in this more formal way. That's really hard to get. We'd like to get it. We're thinking about trying to get it in Texas before we get too far, but it's a gold standard that's really hard to come by. In the meantime, we realize that you have to give yourself credit for building a network and understanding what the outcomes of just building that network are, in order to say, okay, the system is working. Yeah. We've optimized the system. We've made sure that people are moving, that the coordination center is moving people to the right providers quickly and accurately before you can say, okay, did we do something for the person? If you don't do that, you're never going to be able to move to demonstrate that it's what you did that helped the person. It could have been something else. Yeah. Why is it better that they went through the network than just going to that one provider that they know about? So I'm kind of hanging out a little bit further to the left than Jim in terms of what we're measuring. But the idea is that now we feel, and I think the data shows how much we've improved the system, to begin to study what it's doing for the people that the system is helping. Yeah. And then lastly, I think a little bit weirdly, we've been able to demonstrate that communities are better off. I think that you'll hear about that during our panel. You'll read about that in the transparency report, where states and other populations are adopting this. I mean, Dan Brillman can speak to it, how this has proliferated in other places. So we know some of that, but there's more to be known there too. And then lastly, the conditions Jim was talking about, those don't go away. It shifts a little what it looks like, who's paying, what your supporters are doing for you, how the providers are engaged, but those conditions stay. And then last, learning. I think we knew we were learning, but you have to codify that. You have to create the mechanism, the practice that we'll talk about, that efficiently moves information between networks to make sure that we're taking advantage of that.
Yeah, so just before I close on this slide, the gap between system and individual is important to understand. We were advised, against my common sense of pragmatism, to spend time building and optimizing the networks themselves before you try to measure the impact on an individual's life. And it was sound advice, because it could be really ugly for the person whose issue was resolved, and we had to rethink that. We don't want it to be ugly for the person whose issue is resolved. We spent a lot of time building networks, creating efficiencies within these networks, connecting these networks, importantly, so that when you are capable of measuring, did a person's life improve, you've done it in an optimal way, because otherwise it's really inefficient. It is not a marketplace. It's not organized. I got here, I'm better. We are more focused today on getting you there in the least amount of time, so that somebody organized and equipped to do what they do best does what they do best. And there's a sense of efficiency and efficacy to that providers tell us they like. Their ability to work with human beings. The workload goes down. They're not spinning out dealing with ineligible clients. For providers in this country, they spend a lot of time trying to stitch together solutions beyond their means. It's what the network does for them. The networks does for them. So, I spend most of my time on the community conditions. The team deployed spends most of its time organizing performance-based activities. But the leadership, Mike's scariness and my scariness, all goes into maintaining conditions, relationships locally, funders, partners. John Falkenberry from the USO of North Carolina, if he's mad at me, he picks up the phone. Where's my check? These are the things that go on that nobody knows about, that goes into this effort behind the scenes to keep the trains just capable of running on time. So, and we've realized that you are not willing to do this work across this country unless we give you resources to do it. It's not your day job to innovate. And so if you want to innovate, you need a model that delivers resources, breaks down barriers, and allows people the freedom to, the willingness to change. Would you agree, John?
Well, it seems I have that stuck in chest.
I know. Yeah.
Yes.
He's a buddy. Okay. All right. So, Gilly, last one on this.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we're going to spend a little bit of time on talking through what we measure, what those outcomes look like. And the thing that I want to say at the top of this slide is that all of our coordination centers that are in the room and on the webinar, they're going to be like falling asleep when I say this, because we talk about this with them all the time. They talk about this every day. This is not news to them, and that's the point. So we've settled on things that we think are important to make sure that we're doing the work that we say that we're doing as well as we can.
Yeah.
And the first three buckets here, coordination center activities, provider activities, and growth, all help us get to those system outcomes. They help us understand if the networks are doing what we intend for them to do. And we've set aim points for the first time around each of these things. And we're going to talk a little bit we'll give an example of each one in the subsequent slides. But the point being that we set them, not every network is going to hit every one, but we set them because a network has hit every one, at least one already. So they're rooted in the data that we already have. And then the last bucket is that receptive condition. So part of the point of it is that these are the things that, together with our team supporting them, our coordination centers have in their control to work on these things and to make sure that we're optimizing that network operations.
Yeah. Of all the Houdinis we pulled in the last 5 years, the thing that scared me the most was establishing a set of standards for the country. Never been done before, and it really translates into setting expectations of people who served and their families. And this scared the heck out of me, because you end up with 16, 17 networks. What are the standards of performance for these networks? You know, we had this idea on the side, driving performance and practice through insights. That's taking data in and turning data into something actionable. And what we always wanted to do was to softly get into the world of establishing a set of standards around how people should be served in this country, which doesn't exist. Sadly, there are no standards of performance. And Mike Haney, I don't know if he's in the room again, when President Bush, Miguel's boss, asked him, how do we know what good looks like? You can't answer the question. And that was President Bush's number one question. How do we know what good looks like in this country today? And so it took us years to kind of collect data, be comfortable with our partners in rolling this out. And instead of hardcore Army 101 goals and objectives, they became aim points, non-punitive. So if you're going to do this work, you don't penalize the partners who are willing to step forward and innovate. You give them a set of aim points, and you don't kill them like the USR briefs for my Army pals, and when you didn't meet your readiness objectives and you went in your little hole and died and went back to your unit and cried. It's a little bit different here. Here's an aim point. Go for it. Here's the tools. Here's the coaching. Here's the model. We're that group. It's coaching. And so aim points become important. Off to the right, we want to be in 2019 the organizational effort that 96% of the time gets the right person to the right provider. Stop. Almost 100% of the time get the right person to the right provider. Now, That's a lot of work. You have to understand the need, you have to understand the solution, and you got to pair it. And you got to do it as quickly as you can to address the need. So the first thing is an outcome. Can we get the person to the right provider to the highest possible percentage we can? That goal for the coming year is 96% of the time. We screw up. We make mistakes. We send people places to the wrong place, but we do it digitally. People don't actually have to show up to be denied service. That's also different here. Because the old way of doing this, you show up in the organization and I said, hey, Joe Tracy, you should go over here because that place can take care of you. First of all, I didn't know if you got there. I didn't know if you were served there. When you did get there, if you were denied eligibility, it's a mistake, right? And the likelihood of you going back into that Hellcat fire is very, very small. And so if we can take responsibility for getting you there at that rate, we're going to be happy with that. It's a goal. It's an aim point. There are some other things. Time to match. To understand, my friends in every mind know this every day. To understand, you have to understand the needs and the solution, and you have to be that matchmaker. And technology allows you to be that matchmaker. And so when you look at this 5 days, some of you may think, why does it take that long? Because our teams do a really good job because it drives 96% of the time they get the right person to the right place. So they spend a lot of time cooking up the solution. They spend a lot of time dissecting the needs, and they're very good in light of that, of getting people to the right place. So it takes a while, right, Gil? It does. So in this last thing there, these 3 buckets we're going to dive into. We're going to go more into them, but these aim points are important because we now, for the first time, have a path that we want to put everyone on. And people will come up short, people will exceed, but this idea that a set of standards is emerging is powerful stuff because it sets expectations for human beings on how they can be served in this country. We have the ability to talk about what good could look like. Just starting to get our wind in that, and our partners, we worked in 2018 a lot of effort to get to this thing. So, okay, we're going to pause. Lindsay, is there anything that we need to address in the chat room? Okay, good. All right, any questions on the theory of change, aim points, goals, objectives, anything that we can address there for anyone before we move on? Okay, does that mean you understand it, or you're just like, we were on Capitol Hill yesterday, and there's a term, smile nodding. That's like, I hear you. When are you going to get out of here? Like, okay, so it was a new term for us. So, all right, we're going to dive into what it's looking like. So at the top, 17 plus communities, 12 plus states, including the District of Columbia, and one solution. Here's where we are. There's about 850 providers across this country who are doing work in this environment. When we started, there was 40. Okay, in the first network in New York City, there were about 40 providers. About 850 providers now have at their disposal Unitas technology paired in a coordinated set of solutions in their community. 22,000 unique individuals, about 45,000 asks upon the network. So let's talk about outcomes. You can have the other side.
So on the right side here, in those aim points, what you didn't see were 2 things. One, 72% overall, how successful were we in the end? Did you get what you came in for? And on the other side here, overall, how long did it take from A to Z? That's because we think if we achieve all of those aims, those 2 numbers will improve. That's basically where we're at.
That's the hypothesis. Yep.
You know, we can't control how long it takes a provider to do what they do, but we can look at what our role is in that and optimize that. And we've already improved year over year on both of those things. That's really the takeaway for the nation.
These are the national indicators that we're just choosing to show. There are others. We're going to get into a couple more in a moment. This is the macro of AmericaServes across the nation. Now, importantly, these communities are now interconnected. We are actually moving human needs from San Diego, California, to Southampton Roads, Virginia. We have the ability to do that. You can actually be a family. Hey, Dan, how are you, buddy? Good seeing you. I know, Dan Gade. You can be a Navy family in San Diego making a move across the country to Southampton Roads, Both those communities are AmericaServes communities. They're actually both affiliates, by the way, because Dan's team led the way in those. But the ability to kind of move a person in advance of their physical move and turn on solutions, that's the standard for the country. If we can interconnect our communities and stitch together these providers this way, think of the power of that when we can really address the needs. That's powerful stuff, and we're capable of doing that now. We have intra-network referrals
There have been
underway.
about 400 just this year. That's about how long it's existed for, and about half of those were between our own networks, and about half were to other Unite Us clients who we have agreements with that we can send clients to.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really important thing, especially for our population that moves across the country so freely. And I use this story all the time. Families with exceptional family members, children tied to needs so deeply in their community, and then you uproot them, right? People are nodding their heads. Military families understand this. Spend a lot of time turning on resources only to turn off resources. Pack the car, pack your crap, we're moving. So where are we going? Well, just come on, let's go, we're moving. All right, and then you start all over again. And the idea is to shorten that. It's just not the way to do it in the future of this country. So there's a better way of doing it. So we're going to go micro on you. We're going to get inside a couple of KPIs, key performance indicators, to talk about what it looks like in specific networks relative to some of those buckets that we talked about. Gilly's going to take the first one. We're going to go alternate here. There's 4 examples. The point I want to make at the top is these are 4. There are a lot of examples behind it. So this is a sample of what goes on in a community around the key performance indicators that they use to drive the performance within their community. So Gil.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest message for all of these slides is that, again, these slides are of slides that have already been shown, already been discussed within networks at key points in their maturity to do a level set on where they are and how they're doing. So we help supply them with this information, and they lead conversations with their providers because it's important that we stay transparent with our providers and in the community. So in this particular case, this is our average time to match a client to an appropriate provider. Jim talked about this, why 5 days. This is from Serving Together's most recent in practice review in December. They've been soft launch for about a year, active 6 or hard launch 6 months at this time point. What we see early is that because of the way that this looks at things like of the things that got closed during this time period, what was the average time it took for that person to get where they needed to go? So over time, sometimes that can lengthen because you have things that take longer. But early, they're out the gate, they're under 5. We hypothesize that that's because they've had the benefit of talking to their peers and understanding what it takes to do that work well. I don't know if there's anything else we even need to say. We got into this one.
Let's ask our friends from Everymind. I mean, this type of information, you pay attention to it because it impacts the bottom line, your ability to favorably resolve the client's issues. And so, do you use this data to get better every day? That's what we do with it, right? So, I mean, they're our partner in the National Capital Region. This is one snippet of data that they use to drive performance within their network, and it's the matching functionality. It takes time. If you have on average 2 needs for every one person, you spend time triaging that. You get inside it. And by the way, these are social workers who get inside it. It's not sergeants major. These are credentialed individuals we did that the first time, Prez. The first guy we had running a network was a retired E9, and it was disastrous. Not anything against my E9 friends, but it didn't go so well. And then we peeled it back and said, we need to hire social workers. But the idea is spend time understanding the needs so you make a good match, quickest. So at this level, the business model is how well you can take a need and distribute that need across the community so the provider who is the right provider to address that need can turn on the services, can solve the individual's problems. So we didn't get into this, but the challenges confronting us are all around navigation. We don't know how to go from point A to point B, and providers, God bless their hearts, don't do a great job of coordinating beyond their organic boundaries because they haven't had the tools. they haven't had the model to do it. So this one we pay attention to because it ultimately determines how well we favorably resolve issues and how well we get you to the right place. So, all right, next up is our friends in Eastern Carolina. NC serves Coastal, one of 4 networks operating in North Carolina. This one is key to me because without providers activated on the platform using the tools, we will not change the world. Our efforts locally are around getting providers to use the tools that have been constructed for them, giving them the model, giving them the coaching. So we call it provider activity, but what it really does is how many providers are making referrals, receiving referrals, how many are doing both? Because it speaks to the adoption of a new way of doing business. And we pay a lot of attention to this. This is where the crux of change management is occurring, is that instead of using a Rolodex, instead of popping an email to my pal Prez, because he does really good things with housing, I'm using the network to get there. And I'm trusting in the center of it, somebody's going to get me to Prez because that's how this works. But inside providers' minds, not so simple. I got my Rolodex, I got my speed dial, I got my friends because they've been trusted. And to demonstrate trust and confidence in something different is the hardest work, right, Nicole? It's the hardest thing we do is getting people to trust that there is an element in their community that can take the onus off all these providers to get the right person to another provider. So there's some data here. We have an aim point. We're somewhere in our networks between 55 and 95% are making or receiving referrals. We'd like to be at 80% consistently. We'd like 8 of every 10 providers at this point in our life making or receiving referrals, using the tools. Our coaching techniques are centered on this because this is how we change the behavior necessary to change the way people can be served. So anything you want to add there, Gil?
No.
Okay.
We're good.
Next up, growth.
Growth. Okay. So I think one of the things that, Jim was talking about how his hesitation at setting standards, another thing we've been hesitant to do is to decide what good growth means because we don't know, there's not a real sense of when we'll have hit the ceiling of demand. So we're just watching it. We're seeing, what happens. We've had conversations with different networks where some perceive that it's still going to grow really quickly. I know we talked in Metrolina about how they're mature enough that it might start to level off, things like that. We just don't really know. So in addition, actually, to the growth of new clients and new service requests, one of the other things that we're going to start paying more attention to is something we're calling market share. And it's a really imperfect measure, but it's just looking at what is the veteran population in our service area and looking at what percentage of that we're serving, what, our number of veteran clients over that number to see, what's our saturation of that area. Yeah. And it seems like year over year, it's in our more mature networks, it's grown about a percentage point per year. So we're going to keep an eye on that as well. So this is a network this was from our meeting in San Antonio in November, where they took a look at growth, and they're one of our fastest growing networks, Military City, USA.
Yep.
They are really, I think actually looking at this is really helpful to contextualize all the other numbers because we forget often that one of the things, we say quickly, accurately, but also at scale, because this has to scale up. And if you don't look at this, you don't know if you're holding your numbers, you're still performing at the level that you want while this is still going up. And then we look at demographics often. We especially like to look at, that market share number with respect to female veterans. This is one where it's actually parallel, but for almost all of our other networks, we're seeing about double the percentage of female veterans as make up the local population.
Yeah. The approach has been constructed in such a way that we really don't care how you get into the network. That donut at the bottom, the sourcing of asks for help, you can walk into a provider, you can call an 800 number, you can submit your ask on the website. You can do it all you can do it a multitude of ways. What we designed was something that was more universally accessible for all military-connected populations, veteran, transitioning service member, active duty, spouse. None of that applies when you first approach AmericaServes. It's part of that eligibility criteria that coordination centers work hard to match need to solution. But at the top, we don't care who you are. We don't care how you served. We just care you did, or you're the family member of. Doesn't matter. What I've struggled with in this country is a bunch of one-offs and really winnowing people's access. I had lunch with a couple whose son committed suicide early in these wars, and their beef was did not know how to access services, didn't know how to access care, was rebuffed. These stories that you hear over and over again. So the solution by design was designed to be open, don't care. It gets harder the further down you get into the pipe, but we created the ability to be agnostic as to all that at the top of this initiative. So it gets harder as you get down into it, but it's universally accessible. So if there's one KPI that's the furthest from our control, it's how to create demand, because it's outreach, it's advertising, it's those things that we have very little money to do. And so when you look at this through the lens of how do you grow, it's organic growth. It's the hard work by our community partners, being out, presenting accessibility. I think our pals in DC put stuff on a bus. Yeah, they got signs on metro buses here in DC. So we're like, whoa, we need to do that. We need to figure that out. So that's San Antonio. The last use case is our pals in Pittsburgh. Megan's here from the Heinz Endowment. So we've been spending time with her. This is actually where the rubber meets the road. To what extent do we favorably resolve the client's issues? And the highest performing network of the 17 plus networks up and running, because they're really good at this, is PA-Serves Greater Pittsburgh. About 86% of the issues presented to the network have been favorably resolved. They're 4 years into this journey. That's a mature network. It's up and running. It's run by a very good team, behavioral health specialists whose bread and butter is solving people's problems. And Pittsburgh's one of those cool communities where there is this sense of we dig it, we're into it. I will say, back to my setting conditions, with Megan in the room, one of the levers is philanthropy that has told its grantees, if you get money from us, this is how you do business in the community. Think of that as a grantee. If you're going to connect human beings with someone else beyond your boundary, this is the way to do it. So, I love those tactics. I can't get them all the time, but it helps us when you have philanthropy kind of setting conditions for you so that they create change and energy consistent with what their expectations are. So just some things. We all know, so inside that number, where's the other 14%? Over half of it is people we can't contact after we serve them. The unable to contact bucket is large because once people are served, right, they typically are not going to share much about how they were. They're just glad they were served, that you resolved their issue. So we're hindered a little bit on the denominator side of this. We're working it. We're trying to develop. We have protocols. We have techniques, follow up, all that stuff, right? But there's still those people they just don't reach back to you. So, and then you just look at where we are with services, the spectrum. These are categorically a multitude of functional areas that can be addressed through these networks by the providers in the networks and out. So we have an overall aim of about 75% we'd like to be at the end of 2019, meaning almost 8 of every 10 individuals who comes through the network's doors has had their issue favorably resolved. Now, from this, we're getting ready to get into the individual outcomes, measuring did we change your life. The next trajectory for AmericaServes is to go all the way to the human being now that we're taking the time to optimize the systems approach to pay attention to did we improve upon your life and how. That's next up. So, okay. Lindsay, are there any questions from around the net? Good. Any questions in here? Macro, micro view. These slides, we took them from the same conversation we're having with you is the same conversation that our communities are having with their partners. They do this annually. We used to do it quarterly. We do this now annually. They're having the same conversation to drive performance in their communities. Some of you have been part of that. Some of you know what these networks do, but these are just plucked as examples from around the initiative itself. Now we're going to get into what we realized in 2018 was important. Maybe we should be creating a practice around this body of work to do things like reduce variance, create standards. So we're going to call this an emerging practice behind the scenes because care coordination is an emerging practice in this country. And the ability to kind of put into the practice the ingredients to drive performance are what we're going to talk about next. So Gil.
So we just talked about the top row of these rings where we're looking at these performance goals, and we think that the end state of that, the impact of that, will be elevating the share of requests that we successfully resolve. At the same time, all of that is underpinned by this practice where we have to collect knowledge, figure out what's good about it, and then push it back out to people when they need it, what they need it for. So we just wanted to show you this is sort of how we're thinking about how these two things relate to each other. One ingredient is the data we just showed you, but that is but one ingredient. So we can even just jump to this is really where we get into, in addition to the data that we're looking at that we have the benefit of having because of the technology, we also look at research. We look at ourselves. We talk to each other, and there's got to be some way to make sure that we're curating that and creating the infrastructure for that to be available to people and accessible to them and pushed to them or pullable for them at the right times.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't know this at the beginning. We'll admit it. We were building networks. Then we built more networks. And then we realized, how do we make the networks get better collectively? The only way to kind of do it was to put a practice behind it, just to put the ingredients in motion around collecting knowledge, curating it, and then disseminating it. And it has been responsible for faster starts in subsequent networks, better starts, better performance, better ability to get up and running. And the idea is now we're treating this as a practice. And there are some real hard elements to that around all the things that are on this slide to see performance increase and people be served better. So it's just one of those things. We didn't know it at the time, right, Maggie? But along the way, you realize you should be doing something to you have 17 communities. Wouldn't it be great if we could get them to kind of work in unison and try to create a set of standards and activities around that? So what it culminated in was in Dallas, we brought everybody together. A lot of you were here in this room, you were with us. I mean, that was at one of our providers called eQuest. Pretty cool equine therapy program. We even had Wartsky on a horse, so living proof. The VA was alongside. Really good efforts around this group of people coming together where knowledge had been collected, it was being curated, and it was being disseminated. It was communities talking to communities who are supportive of this initiative, discussing how to make life better in those communities. And so this was important to us because inside the practice that we've created, we're dealing with three levels within the practice. Locally, it's performance-oriented. It's coaching. It's around those KPIs. A feature we'll get into in a second about the regional side of it, I'll hold on. But nationally, it's the ability to move knowledge across your partners and create the environment for them to learn. There's a term community of practice. That's what's been created here. They are putting into it everything that they learn right back into doing and serving. And so we do this annually. We loved where we did it this year, our friends in Texas. This year we want to take it to North Carolina because there's a lot of good things happening across the state of North Carolina. And this is important to us to kind of look at this way.
It also explains the abundance of horse photographs in our transparency report, just for the record.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to reset here because we've got about 45 minutes, and for about the next 20 to 30 minutes, we're going to go right down into the heart of Hurricane Florence on how the Carolinas responded to what they were confronted with, the reality of mass destruction, a large effort that was going to go into having to serve human needs, and what we witnessed amongst our networks and our providers was remarkable because it was informed by a previous hurricane in Texas. When Harvey hit Houston, our good friends in San Antonio had done some work to receive people who were relocating from Houston, and the network came alive to address those needs. When Hurricane Matthew hit South Carolina, subsequent to that, we became energized around this idea that we have all this network capacity. How do we prepare people in the aftermath of a storm to be served? And there's some really cool stuff here. I'm going to bring up my pal, Lisa Murray. We go back a long ways. We began working in Rochester years ago. But Lisa, I want to introduce you today as I want you to look at her as the shepherd of all our AmericaServes market leads and communities around performance. You can call her a national program director. That's fine with me. Lisa has the most experience doing this work, and so she's been shepherding a lot of our initiatives around our coaching model. I'm going to tee up this slide. I'm going to ask my panel members to first come up if we could. So Blake and the team, I want to get you guys up here and seated before we launch into this, because we're going to shift gears a little bit and we're going to isolate our kind of conversation around the Carolinas. So it'll be a moderated discussion. It's going to start at the top with Lisa, and I'm going to put up a graphic because Lisa had the instinct to do something with her partners who are up here that we'll introduce before this storm ever hit. So Lisa, over to you.
Thank you, Jim.
Yep.
So I think it's important to note that I don't live in North Carolina or South Carolina, and I was actually in Rochester, New York, but I've worked with all these wonderful people for many years now. I'm actually the Southeast Regional Director for the Community of Practice there in North and South Carolina. So as Jim mentioned, this wasn't our first hurricane that aligned with one of our communities, but in the past, we were always very reactive. There was communication that needed to be put out. There was people who needed services in these areas that were impacted, but we had never actually prepped prior to the hurricane. And so during some conversations leading up to the hurricane, myself, Paul, and some of the other network directors were just talking about what was our plan. So we sprung into action, got everybody on a phone call, and not to mention, 2 of our networks along the coastal region had to evacuate, and other networks out of the 5 were on orders to stand by in case they needed to evacuate. So you can't really see much beyond, the red area here, but this is North and South Carolina. And a few days leading up to the hurricane, we didn't know where it was going to hit. If you watched the news, you could see that there were concerns it was going to impact South Carolina more. It was going to impact North Carolina. All we did know is we had to be in a proactive state to determine how we were going to continue operations so that our clients that need services and our providers that provide those services could do so. So we came up with a contingency plan. We were able to shift operations and for our networks in the coastal area to our western network, and you'll hear about some of those cases through the panel and our video that we have. But nevertheless, we had support from Central, who was kind of central to everything that was going on and became a staging area. It was perfect. But we didn't know this beforehand. So we had to do a lot of prep, a lot of contingency planning, and even communication along the way to determine what was going to be said, because we're not an emergency response system. We were in support of the community and our providers. So go ahead.
So,
Yep.
Really quick, yeah.
Yep.
Really quickly, we put this together for the recent coastal IPR, just to take a snapshot of what had been done. And the big takeaway here is that all of the requests that came in during this time have really been closed, and 91% of them were successfully resolved. So all of that took all of these guys to accomplish, and you saw what our numbers are and how much higher that is. So we just wanted to, we did take a look afterwards, and not only did we learn a lot from how to be prepared, but also that what we did was the right thing to do.
Yeah. There are some lessons learned that we'll share with you at the bottom. Oops, I'm sorry. But I want to introduce Blake Bourne for a moment. So this panel is going to be moderated, thanks, Lise, by Blake. He is the chief executive of Veterans Bridge Home. I hope you didn't break that, because we'll be buying it. And he's been our network director and supporter in what was our second network constructed in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's NC Serves Metrolina. There are 4 networks. This panel, as it's in Blake's hands, they're going to pick apart how the AmericaServes team addressed the needs that were presented in light of the storm. And some of the lessons learned after that are pretty compelling about coordinating solutions across communities. So Blake.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jim. I just want to take a quick minute since Dr. Henney was up here and needed the step stool. That's what that noise was. And because our panel here, my esteemed colleagues and friends from North Carolina, is pretty Navy and Marine Corps heavy, I have to say I am glad we're at AUSA and go Army. Whoa. This is the value of moderating the panel. Colonel Howell wouldn't let me not say that. Thanks to Jim, thanks to the AmericaServes team for putting this together. They really have empowered our communities. As the second, as he said, of 16, we are a stronger community because of the work with AmericaServes and IVMF. So thank you very much for that. As Dr. Henney mentioned up front, empowering communities, right? When a veteran comes back to their hometown, they don't go back to national resources, they come back to communities. Really what that means is Jim's team empowers leaders in that community. And we've got 3 of those leaders here in Jarek, Brandon, and Paul. Those leaders then in turn empower their providers, empower the people that are the frontline service delivery method for a community. We have one here in Lindsay as a local provider, and then we have 2 strategic partners as well, as the Department of Public Safety and the American Red Cross. So it's empowering all the way down till you get to that individual family, that individual veteran level. And the reality is, this experience of Hurricane Florence is really an intense snapshot an intense snapshot around the work that's done on a local level every day. It's just on a statewide macro level. There's a few key themes that came out of this. One is relationships, the other is leadership, and then finally teamwork. None of this would have been possible without those 3 things, and in our comments from our panelists, you'll hear that. But we have to remind everybody, people do this work. People's lives have been impacted every day, and this storm impacted lives. Over 1 million people were evacuated. Over 5,000 were actually rescued. We had 137,000 people apply for disaster assistance, and unfortunately, 42 people lost their lives. So it's important that while we talk a lot about the metrics and the coordination and the systems work and the relationships, this is really individuals' lives that were impacted and are still, as you'll hear, are still. So for that reason, we wanted to start with Jarek and Lindsay from Coastal Carolina to talk about that pre-storm sort of understanding of when the storm was coming in, what it felt like on a personal and professional level, and the preparations and decisions you had to make. Jarek?
Sure, you forgot to mention Go Air Force. Yeah, so from a personal perspective, you know, when there's a disaster headed your way, there's a whole bunch of things that go on your mind from a personal perspective. But then thinking as a leader from a leadership perspective, you know, there's a sense of guilt in things that go on your mind because you're faced with a circumstance that you may have to leave your ship, so to speak. But the good thing about the way these networks are connected is immediately my pal Brandon contacted me a few days before the storm hit, and he said, you know, Jarek, you know we're connected here, we're interconnected, you know we'll be able to take care of this. Following that, my good friend Paul, he let me know that, you know, your folks down there are going to be fleeing or evacuating to Raleigh. You know what? We got that taken care of as well. So I felt comfortable evacuating and taking care of our personal responsibilities, knowing that the community was still going to be taken care of.
Like any good leader would, you don't want to step away from your post, but when you know you have people around you, you can. Right. Lindsay.
Yes. So I had to evacuate. I will tell on myself, I did leave with my workstation. So as soon as we got to the Raleigh area, you know, I was looking for Wi-Fi and I was checking on Brandon and his team as they were starting to take out calls.
Another good leadership trait. Yeah.
So
Lindsay.
good point. You do mention that you're not sure when you have to leave ship. And so in my personal, I evacuated as well. And I had to evacuate a little bit earlier because where my home is situated is closer to the coast than in Onslow County. So I had to take my family and leave, knowing that I was leaving a career center that we weren't sure if it was going to be there when we got back, because we had no idea where this hurricane, how hard it was going to hit. It kept changing with how strong it was. So we just had to make sure we covered everything up. We had our meetings prior to, we talked to partners, and we called appointments that were coming in to make sure that they knew not to come. Number one, we don't want to see you, because the appointments that we see, their unemployment benefits are reliant on them coming into those appointments. So if they don't come, they could have been cut off. So we want to let them know, hey, don't worry. We don't expect you to come out in the middle of a hurricane, so please evacuate if you need to. So again, knowing that so many of our evacuees did go to the Charlotte area, the Raleigh area, and knowing that they were on board there, so that was good. But again, we didn't know what we were in for when it came down to it. So yeah.
Sure, you actually transferred operations, right?
Absolutely. So the way that worked is our role as a coordination centers, of course, we receive all the referrals, whether it be from the providers or directly from the clients or veterans who contact us. So that responsibility, that role was shifted to Brandon and his team. And I have to say that they did an outstanding job monitoring and managing their workload that they already had, and then taking on additional workload. And what really was that going to look like? People calling in the middle of a disaster. He had no idea. I mean, it goes on your mind, the thoughts, but really the types of calls that you had to handle during that time in an environment before this work, you would not have known the landscape, but because the partners are already situated on the platform, he still was able to do his job. The way I look at it is, it's like a watch. There's a whole bunch of things going on under a watch, but these families had no idea all of these moving parts that were taking place. They had no idea that the responsibility was transferred, and that's key. Keeping the same experience, even though we're preparing and going through a disaster.
Brendan, if you could talk about that, the recognition from all the way in Asheville, right, several hundred miles away, that decision to reach out to Jarek and the realization that you could.
Well, I think that really what IVMF has done a really good job of is we do a really good job of selling this to our community, getting that buy-in, having our providers trust that we're going to be there and we've got their six, so we're going to do that. So we do this all the time, and we try to sell it and we put it out. So when this hurricane hit, for Jarek to be able to be now a provider, a consumer of what's going on, because he's evacuating his family, and to be able to give that up to the rest of us up here and trust that it's going to be took care of, to me is that embodiment of what we're trying to do in the community, to have more trust with each other and to have that family type environment. So when we shifted that, we shifted the operations 3 days before the hurricane hit. And so my team, I was like, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how much volume we're going to get. Be prepared to work some overtime. They worked 2 weekends in a row just because we didn't know what was going to happen. We wanted to make sure that if a call come in or a referral come in a crisis situation, we were able to address that. So, it was seamless. The technology that Dan has built and Unitas has allowed us to, know what providers were still functioning in his region and in Paul's, and knowing where we can send individuals, and then more importantly, the phone calls. I mean, we got a lot of phone calls that wasn't calling InServes Western. They were calling InServes Coastal, and his team had displaced. But those calls were being forwarded to our team, and then we had access to all those providers that were up and running, and were able to address those needs in a timely manner.
And I think it's important to keep in mind, it might have made sense geographically to push that responsibility to Paul, but as it was mentioned, a lot of the fleeing and evacuees and some of the impact of the storm, most of your market was considered a disaster area, correct, Paul? And so it didn't make sense to do that. And then the next in line would be Metrolina in Charlotte, but we were going through a transition period in our coordination center. We only had 50% staff. So while we wanted to help, we were concerned we may not have the capacity to help. So it made the most sense to lift and shift all the way to Asheville. That opportunity, that ability, and those relationships are key, and I think these guys deserve to be commended for that. But Paul, talk about that, the realization of that storm coming in and the effect it had on your community and the work with your partners.
Yeah, it was really, it happened really quick, the coordination piece. It was almost like, well, what else do we need to coordinate? And like Brandon said, Paul, I got this. Or, Jarek's like, I got this. A piece I need to put in, and I shared it with Blake this morning, though, was, we were impacted too. Not necessarily the city of Raleigh area, but our southeast, our cover areas in Fayetteville was heavily impacted. It had been beat up by Matthew in previous hurricanes, so there was a lot going on in there. And I didn't share it with many people, but I was one phone call away from calling you or Nicole because I was down community coordinator and almost down another one due to not having power and ability to communicate. But I had plenty of confidence. I shifted to the National Guard headquarters in Raleigh in my USO of North Carolina hat to assist the National Guard and what you would think the traditional USO supporting National Guard soldiers out there doing it. And I could talk for 25 minutes on that alone, but like that'll lead into what I saw was what's going on with our providers and what's the capability. So we spent a lot of time on who can still be a provider, or they shut down, or they degraded. I know Brandon had that, the Coastal Network, and I had it, kind of a what's the pulse daily of our providers and their ability to support. And then the shift, the normal employment referrals are going to shift to something else. It's really, really interesting.
Well, and I think you see the different layers of leadership, right? And the responsibilities that each of them took on in a different way and the decisions they had to make. But then you shift into that teamwork. Then the storm hit. Then reality set in. Then that immediate aftermath of exactly triaging who is help. Half of your market was severely impacted, half was not. Your entire market was impacted. So I brought a quote from General Mattis, just for you, Paul. But he talks about, so General Mattis says, in this age, I don't care how tactically or operationally brilliant you are, if you cannot create harmony, even vicious harmony, on the battlefield based on trust across service lines, coalition and national lines, civilian and military lines, then you need to go home. Because your leadership is obsolete. We have got to have leaders who can create harmony across all these lines. Paul, talk about that harmony, because you are in the state capitol, in the center on both sides of all of this chaos, in a way, with two fantastic strategic partners to your right, creating that harmony. Your team does this every day, but what does this harmony look like in the case of Hurricane Florence?
While I was, working half days, like 18 hours or whatever, for a couple of weeks, like Brandon's team, in the National Guard headquarters, I got tied into this email loop by accident. And it was, hey, Paul, you might need to get on this daily call or email exchange with Sherry. I'm like, who's Sherry? And it's like disabilities. And I was like, wait a minute. So I had plenty of time, and it was the most well put together collection of information I had seen yet post-hurricane. Yeah. So it was so professionally done, and I had plenty of time. I read every bit of it, and what was in there was these golden nuggets of information. It was gold. I couldn't get it myself. We had never met. Actually, today is the first time we've met. We tried to meet 10 times, but we're very busy. What I found in there was, we had the two mega shelters. We had one in Chapel Hill, and we had the one in Winston-Salem. We were able to get a community coordinator in there, Rebecca, for example, in Winston-Salem. Meet with FEMA, meet the shelter manager, talk about veterans, talk about the unique needs of veterans, and meet some of the unique needs through the network. What I saw was coastal people evacuated, Brandon working a referral, but us getting the central North Carolina getting immediate needs because they're on fixed incomes, they're elderly. Case I use is an elderly veteran that made it all the way to Raleigh. I found out she slept in her car in a Bojangles parking lot in the middle of the storm with it broken, and we didn't quite get that piece that day. We got it the next morning. We were working on it at 7, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, but her cell phone died. But we were able to bring it all together.
And so when Dr. Haney and Jim talk about empowering communities, Lisa didn't say, do this, do that. They allow Paul and Jarek and Brandon to make those decisions, to take someone out of his coordination center into the shelters where the direct need is. And if you do look at that report, that was that access to services was lacking across many of the shelters, correct? Yeah. And so talk about that, David. Everybody knows the Red Cross, but in case they don't, specific to Hurricane Florence and specific to the relationships with both Sherry and Paul, what is the Red Cross's role kind of where does it start and stop, and where do these guys pick up?
Sure, everybody does know the Red Cross handles disasters, and we're there every time there's a disaster. By the way, the name disaster is because it's disastrous. There's no infrastructure. People are gone. People are flooded. People are dying. People are being rescued. Very, very difficult situations. We in the Red Cross are doing that through our disaster organization. We're doing that through our blood organization, providing more blood ahead of the storm in anticipation of the need for blood where it's going to be needed. And we're doing that through what we call our Service to the Armed Forces organization, which I represent. My counterpart here in Washington, D.C. in the National Capital area was one of the first people pre-storm to be right out here. Chris Duffley was our elected official liaison, going out to several counties trying to figure out which ones were the ones that needed the most help. I relieved someone who relieved him just a couple of weeks later. Prior to that, I was doing shelters. As we say in the Navy, go Navy, it was all hands on deck. Whenever there is a disaster, it is all hands on deck. I ran shelters in the Charlotte area. Then I went out and I was an elected official liaison, which basically means try to make sure you solve the problems before the elected officials hear about them, or they have to get that far. And that's what I did out in North Carolina. So, you know, we had 10,000 homes either destroyed or sustaining major damage. We supported every one of those homeowners with money. Many of those were veterans. We, through the relief societies, every relief society offered funds, different amounts of funds, to their military members. And the Red Cross, for anyone who's not near a base where they can go to a base or a post or a fort and get their funds, they come through the Red Cross. So AmericaServes knows all about that, and whenever there is a military member or a retired military veteran, they know to come to us because that's how they will get their funds from the Relief Society. Lots of ways in which we worked with all four of the organizations in North Carolina.
Sherry, if you could, I'll reiterate what was said earlier. The storm after the storm, the report that was done, looking at the aftermath of the storm and where there were some great connections and then there's some really, opportunities to improve upon. Can you speak from your perspective across the state in how important organizations like the Red Cross, who provide a service and an opportunity that nobody else does, where that linkage was between folks like Paul's team? Specifically, just for everyone's context, her focus is on people with disabilities, so another special population, a little bit more vulnerable, but first and foremost, human beings.
Thank you. So very interesting. I've been in this position for 1 year. Hurricane Florence was my first hurricane. Disability integration specialist position is a new one in the country. There's 4 of us in 4 different states. And so these are new and trying to develop what we're supposed to be doing during disasters. So when Hurricane Florence came, not a lot of background, not a lot of knowledge of what I should be doing, certainly assisting in mass care, mass sheltering, mass feeding, making sure people in the shelters are getting what they need. But the other thing, and it's funny, you have plans, you have procedures, you have practices, but then something like this happens and something just comes out of the woodwork. It seems natural. It seems like something that you need to be doing, and I felt compelled to have these calls. So we had just begun a disability advisory committee for North Carolina Emergency Management. I used those folks, started the calls a couple days prior to landfall, gave a forum for people to understand what was going on. I'm situated in the Emergency Operations Center, so I had access to a lot of information that people that serve people with disabilities or serve people that are low income, housing needs, et cetera, don't have the ability to put their hands on right away. So I was able to share this information and also ask for issues, concerns that people had or were hearing about in the communities that they served in. And we were able to do a lot of issue resolving right away. One of the things I'm most proud of is the fact that we were able to hear these issues that came up and do some resolution around them. And I didn't have to hear about them 3 months later saying, oh, did you know this happened? Thinking, if you just told me, I could have put some resources towards that. So it was a great opportunity. I had someone that stepped forward and just on their own decided to take notes, which is something during emergencies, you don't have people that want to take notes. So we had a fantastic record for all those folks that weren't able to make our daily calls. They were able to go back and read all of the information. And so there was more information on the ground, or more information to our state agencies, who were then able to get it to their contacts and folks on the ground, and were able to feel like they were part of the solution as it was going forward and able to be more responsive. And I got the email from Paul saying, please put me on this list. And I must admit, I'd never heard of North Carolina or AmericaServes prior to that, and was very grateful for his contact and his information, and being able to help folks who are veterans as well as people that currently serve. So.
Thank you, Sherry. That's part of that informing the work, working with professionals in the human service space to better inform our work so that we can lend our experience to theirs and vice versa. Paul and Brandon, if you could, in our last few minutes, talk about, right now, lessons learned. What did we learn from this? What might you have done differently? What should other communities consider?
I'll let Brandon close it because he literally transferred control back at the end, and he's better than me at this. I would be remiss if I did not mention, though, Robin and the team from Hopeful Warriors that are up here. If I have to support a disaster, I want a young lady named Jordan Huffman next to me. She sent me some stuff. They helped 37 families. They were impacted themselves. And I looked from 1 September to 1 November 2018. We had 44 cases, Central Carolina with Hope for the Warriors. Most of that was housing and shelter and individual and family support. This is really big, so thank you very much. The lessons is from Sherry has created and her team an agency and organizational working group that's going to meet soon. And she has other areas of it too, and for lack of time, we really can't parcel that out. But we're going to be part of that as NC Serves, as a community of practice. This is it. That was it. I couldn't be happier. I can go home now. We're going to put it in a bottle. We're going to put it on the shelf. We're going to study it. We're going to make it better. So unfortunately, the Carolinas seems to be a target for hurricanes, that we're going to be way ahead of it. We're going to meet those needs much better.
Brandon?
Yeah, I think what Paul just said there, I think that we did a really good job this go around. We saw this coming. Lisa alluded to it, of being a little proactive. I think being a little bit more proactive, a little bit better, would have helped us out. The email chain that Paul was talking about was phone calls, emails on the road, 10 o'clock at night. And unfortunately, all that happened, and we actually assisted that individual, but we weren't able to capture that on the back end through the United system. Crisis situations calls for crisis measures. We weren't as much concerned about capturing the data for Gilly as we were actually providing those services for the people who needed them. And I think that's a culture piece that all of us up here realize, that we're more concerned with the quality of service that we're providing, less concerned with the data, but we are learning that's important. So I think if we would have planned a little bit more proactively, we could have captured the data a little bit better. There would have been a little bit more seamlessness in that process. But I think overall, what you've heard up here is we were able to all come together in regards to our differences, in regards to what we had going on. We all come together to collectively help the people of North Carolina during this time. So.
Lindsay and Jarek, if you would just close us out. Obviously, this storm came and went, but the impact is still being felt. Can you talk to us about just that in the aftermath, the lessons you learned from that period of time, and then the things that have transpired since then?
Sure. So when I look back, and we're still going through the effects of the storm, but it's looking back at how did the community respond, how did we as coordination center respond, and the way that we're responding is partners are collaborating with each other. So I'm finding that these referrals that we're sending often are housed with multiple providers who have now since lost their main office, so they're partnering. So having a bird's eye view, looking at all the partners partnering with each other, understanding that now us as providers, we're also people who need the services.
Lindsay,
you have anything?
So as a provider, we found that the NC Works Career Center, being a state workforce agency, we needed the coordination center. We needed the other partners in the community. Our building was damaged from the hurricane, and we are a key component of the workforce in Onslow County. We had individuals, once they were in, coming back to the area, they're finding that maybe they're returning to work, but they missed out on a period of time for work, so they had to apply for disaster unemployment assistance. And they didn't have a place to do that because our office was closed. But luckily, we have a very strong partnership in Onslow County with all our providers in the area, and we reached out to the Salvation Army. And since the hurricane, the Thursday following the hurricane, they have given us a roof over our heads so that we have a place to operate out of. And 5 months later, we're still operating out of their I call it the Career Center now because it is, but out of their temporary location, their worship center, until our building is fixed. So we're still looking at another possibly 60 to 90 days. So we have been we have benefited, the community has benefited from the partnership because we wouldn't be able to do what we've been doing for the past 5 months if it was not for the close partnerships that we've already established in the community.
So thank you very much for sharing this. I know this was an intense time. It was very hard, a lot of personal loss, but a lot of professional growth and a lot of trust in relationships. Backing out of this, what you see there in the Salvation Army and the state, Department of Commerce, that teamwork makes a difference. That teamwork, though, doesn't happen without good leadership. And leadership doesn't happen without relationships. So as Jim said earlier, the hardest part of this work is absolutely that trust. It's those relationships. But as this, I think, points out, it's the most critical piece as well.
Thank you. So thank you, guys. Lindsay, can you advance the slide for me? Greg, can you? There's a video that we were going to show you in the aftermath of this, which is a layer down, the care coordinators in each of these organizations talking about the human beings they're serving. We're going to send that out to you in the thank you note. So we'll save a little time here, but it's a layer down. It's actually the care coordination that goes into this. So we're pulling up the slide. So there's a couple things that we want to just say in the after that. Ilario Pantano, if you'd please come up. Jeff Smith, if you'd please come up. I want to introduce two more pals, Ilario and Jeff. Jeff is with the North Carolina state government. Ilario used to be. He's a little bit like me, out of state government now into this world. But in the aftermath of the storm, can you guys talk a little bit about what the state, so there's some seminal findings around the role that coordination plays, perhaps a little bit better than the lack of coordination. Can you guys talk about that for a second? Yeah.
Cue it up. And then
yeah, you're going to, yeah.
So thanks, Jim. And that was really powerful to hear everybody's remarks. I just want to throw two numbers at you. 38 is the number of school days that Camp Lejeune families were dealing with their children at home. So an amphibious base had so much damage that the community had the kids home for 38 school days. You just think about that for a second. We had 140 amputations in the city of Wilmington alone from infection from cleanup. So it's still going on. One of the things that I think is the biggest takeaway for everybody in the room is that VA and federal assets, which we often think are the solution set, are one actor. Wouldn't you agree, Jim, that it's about the Department of Health and Human Services? Jeff Smith represents that at the state level agency. It's about the Department of Labor, the DOL vets team. We heard Lindsay speak, and tying all of those assets together at the federal, at the state, at the county, at the community level, and that's what these networks do. I'd say the biggest takeaway overall is that recognition at the state level and even at the installation level. If you remember the slide that was up with that hurricane map, Camp Lejeune, an amphibious base, recognized that they had to turn to the community really for the first time in their history in order to get back on their feet. So just want to recognize that at a global level, the recognition of all the different community partners. And this activity in North Carolina is not sponsored or funded largely by the Department of Veterans Affairs, not at the federal level, not at the state level. And the Department of Commerce and the DOL vets team have been really big actors and partners in this. But the biggest is the Department of Health and Human Services, because this ties back to all the social determinants of health. If you don't have a home and you're in the parking lot of a Bojangles, you're developing a mental health issue. At the same time, you're developing a housing issue. At the same time, you have an employment issue. And if we can address all of that and wrap it around, we have a solution for the future, which is why North Carolina now sees one of the lowest veteran suicide rates in the Southeast and the lowest veteran homeless rate in the Southeast. Why? How? We developed a state-level solution. Jeff, do you want to speak a little bit to how the state's supporting that and HHS's thoughts about it?
Thanks, IP. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Jeff Smith, and I am the Military and Veterans Program Liaison for the Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services in the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, and we're one of 8 sections in that department. Everyone here knows the holes between the silos where people fall through, and the digital joining platform that is at the core of these 4 networks allow them to function back and forth seamlessly in 64 of 100 counties, and I suspect that the reach is actually further once Gilly figures out that part of it. These networks are headed up by friends and coworkers. There's one thing Jim left out, a lot of Marines here.
It was purposeful, Smith.
That's a condition for success.
Vicious harmony, Jeff.
Vicious harmony, absolutely. But seriously, these social determinants of health, these are our clients, our customers, our neighbors, and our friends who just happen to be veterans, many of them. And it is in the interest of the state of North Carolina to make sure that our veterans and their families are well served, just as our active duty neighbors are, because they're all in our area of responsibility. We are lucky that these teams are helping to show the way forward for really reforming the way the rest of state government moves, shoots, and communicates with human service needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. Thanks. So here's the whole point. What happened in North Carolina happens across the country amongst all these networks every day. A lot of horse pictures. We had a good time at eQuest. All our pals and communities. This idea that we do this every day, the only reason we can do it every day is because the hands of doing it every day are in our community partners. They're the ones with their providers who make this kind of response, preparation, and aftermath quite possible. Without it, it doesn't happen. So this series of tiles, these are all wonderful people across the country doing wonderful work in exactly the same fashion. And so the power of connecting these tiles together is where we are today. So we're going to speed this up just to get to the end. Nick, where are you? Come here, buddy. So here's where we're headed in 2019. For those of you who know us from other program angles, like Onward to Opportunity, Karen and Sandy are here from our National Capital Region running O2O. Thank you, Sandy. We are now our own partner. So I'll say it this way. We are now our own partner. What happens with transitioning populations on military installations and Onward to Opportunity, along the way we encounter a lot of their needs. We are integrating those 2 buckets of this organization's reach, scale, and might. So learners accessing training and credentialing at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina or Fort Belvoir, Virginia, they are now being introduced to their companion service delivery network in AmericaServes. So what IVMF is about is integrating its own portfolios. And for Mike and the folks in the back who started a program, we became portfolios. Now we become one IVMF. The work ahead of us in 2019 is oriented on making sure we are our own best partners so that Karen and Sandy, when they encounter a need for someone in our O2O bucket, knows what to do with it to bounce it to Ann Mazier and her crew in every mine to address local needs. And if that needs to be moved across the country, we move it across the country. So there's a lot of work there. It's wraparound services. Growth and expansion. Sean, where are you? Sean Hanna, our good friends in the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute. Texas is the target. 3 networks there, hopefully 4 more in the next 2 years, 7 and 8. Think about that in Texas. Largest single population of veterans in the armed forces is situated in the great state of Texas. And so the conditions are strong, they're good, we've got good partnerships on the ground. Ilario is going to build our 3rd network in the Rio Grande Valley starting in the coming months, and we'll move forward with additional networks there. More networks, more coverage. Performance. Each of our communities now has an engagement plan. They're working collectively as a region. 2018, we introduced that middle layer of the practice that I skipped over, the regional community of practice. We have 5 practice champions spread out across this country. They're assembling their respective markets, and they're working commonly, regionally, to develop greater competency and greater capacity to serve. The Walmart Foundation infused some direct monies for specifically that purpose for the next 2 years. So locally, performance, regionally, build capacity, build competency, nationally, share practice. Those sandwiches are what make up what we call Practice 360. It's a triple-decker sandwich that we're about to eat for the next couple of years. So you like that, Nick? Yeah. Better integration. Okay, layers. And then I'm going to turn it over for Nick here because we're going to talk about the scholarly aspect of this, the thought leadership and study.
Thanks, Jim. Just a couple points here. So what you heard today, local partners, empowered by technology, learning from each other, underpinned by measurement and evaluation, that's the heart of what is really improvement science and quality improvement. And that's been our focus really for the last 3-4 years. It's been a huge team effort that I can't overstate with all those involved, and of course, Gilly's effort at the epicenter of all of that, of helping to inform about the work that we do. I think we're at a pivot point in the knowledge creation of the work that we're doing now. So, we penned a blog a couple years ago around this idea of improvement science. Now we want to move toward developing greater evidence around the efficacy of this actual intervention. A lot of it has been focused around how's the system working? How are we building the mousetraps with the data that we have to be able to understand how we're doing? But now we want to partner with other third parties. We already have partnerships in place with researchers at Syracuse University. We're working already alongside other researchers, Dr. Joe Geraci, who's leading an RCT of peer mentoring in New York City. So partnering alongside those types of efforts, looking at both how the network is performing and also how is it actually impacting at the population level in communities over time. And so we're actively pursuing grant and funding opportunities to elevate that work, build more evidence. We're also going to capture more of the lessons learned that you heard today. In terms of since our old driving community impact paper, we've learned a whole lot to capture. So look forward to a white paper coming out later this year. We're conducting case studies of networks. We want to understand about all these success ingredients that Jim mentioned up at the top. Obviously technology is a huge piece of this, but this is a people-oriented intervention. Like what actually works under what conditions in what communities, and then how can we take that and those lessons and carry them forward into the broader health sector? What are the implications for what we're learning here for all Americans? And then finally, something that we've been really focused on in-house over the last 18 months, I would say, is this idea of data management and interoperability. So we're behind the scenes developing better systems to be able to tell this one IVMF story of how folks are entering not just AmericaServes, other services that we provide, and how are we also interfacing with other operations across the country, other platforms. In fact, we're hoping to launch a new effort in Allegheny County, thanks to Megan's initiative and efforts there, about how can we understand how those that are accessing PA serves, but also local public sector services. And so understanding and being able to do some data sharing there and understanding what those types of broader insights in a community. So those are the things that are on the horizon. So thanks.
You got it. Thank you, Nick. Almost done. Powered by great community partners. Those logos represent the 17 plus community efforts that are doing this work on behalf of people like Robin and her team for Hope the Warriors. You just see wonderful organizations. And what makes this kind of cool is they're all different organizations, yet they've all come to this idea that they can serve selflessly in their community as this, integrator of unity of effort, the continuity of operations that you heard in North Carolina. The power behind this is that somewhat agnostic as to who owns the responsibilities. We just look for the best partners we can find, and we found them. They're all very different organizations. Large healthcare providers, the USO of North Carolina, United Way, Good Friends and Forces United, previously known as Augusta Warrior Project, right? Could be an itty bitty unit, could be this thing like Northwell Health, one of the largest single healthcare providers in the country. Each of them has embraced the idea that coordinating care, services, and resources for this population is central to their identity. They own it. And we've just become the coach to this. So great community partners. Where's Ray Tennyson? I mean, doesn't happen without putting the buckets of money into this to be able to distribute them. So this is a snapshot of the funding. Remember I talked about one of the secret ingredients, the 3 philanthropic partners? These are our philanthropic partners. These are the organizations that have provided us with the resources which we steward down into the communities to drive this change management strategy. So, and then lastly, thank you. From us to you, every year we try to do this a little bit better. We spent some time today reminding you, if you've never been around us, what underpins this, the why. We spent some time today talking about the practice. We kind of peeled back macro indicators, micro indicators at the community level. The goal is to be transparent. The goal is to be accountable for what we're trying to do around that why. We have aim points. We know where we're going. Nick talked about 2019. You saw some other stuff. The promise of the coming year is to kind of not only focus relentlessly on good performance, but get ready to drop into this world of impacting individual lives and being able to articulate how we did it. Setting ourselves up for that ultimate goal, the story behind the person who was served, on how well they were served, how well their lives have improved. That's the future here. So, Gilly.
I heard the truck came.
Did it? Do we have parting gifts?
We have parting gifts.
Okay. What do they look like, Gilly?
Oh, I forgot that part.
Where's your prop?
So we'll have these for you guys on the way out. We'll also send everything from today and this out to you, and the video that our partners at USO put together for us about how the care coordinators work together in response to the hurricane. All of that will go out to you guys. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So any questions before we let you get out of here?
We'll be here all day. We won't be
I know,
here all
yeah,
day.
Gilly. I won't be, but Gilly will. I want to thank Mike Haney at the top and the bottom of this for allowing this institute to do this work. The resources that go into this are unmatched. The effort behind this university is unprecedented, and the people are unparalleled in terms of their commitment to this work. So really appreciate it. My great pal, Gilly. Lindsay, one more round of applause for them who make all this possible. Okay. All right, stay seated just for a sec, because I think we're going to hand out the transparency report. It's cool. We encourage you to read it. Our newest member of our advisory board, Secretary Bob McDonald. In it, you'll hear him say, "I wish I had this when I was Secretary of the VA." Little teaser there. And all the work that's ongoing in communities around this work. So our pals in America's Warrior Project, our pals in Bet's Community Connection are also featured in there. So take one. Don't leave the room without one. If you got a question, email us. Just really thank you for being part of this journey. Godspeed, safe travels, and thank you again. So